Hey there, this is your pal Pally, and welcome back to Git Er Raid. Warlords of Draenor beta testing heats up with some Mythic mode bosses. The twin Ogron learn a few new tricks to doubly torment your raid group. If you haven't watched my guide to this fight on Heroic, please take a look at that first, as I'll be referring to the mechanics in there a lot. As always, mechanics can change from the time a fight is beta tested to when it is actually released live. So getting down to it, the real core of this fight is mostly intact. There are the usual stack phases, the spread out stuff, and lots of fire waves to dodge. Really, there are just a few tweaks to some of the heroic mechanics from the bosses, and one new additional mechanic from your old buddy Imperator Margok, who is meddling in the fight as usual. So let's cover that new mechanic, as it seems to be independent of the energy of the bosses and such. In fact, the current iteration of the Dungeon Journal has it listed under Phemos. Anywho, the mechanic is called Arcane Volatility. It places a 6-second debuff on a few raid members. When it expires, it explodes for a fair amount of arcane damage to any allies within 8 yards of the explosion. Obviously, the remedy for the situation is to have those people afflicted with the debuff spread out away from the raid. I'm sure boss mods will be screaming this out to you on live, but pay attention. Moving on, let's talk about the heroic mechanics that get tweaked for Mythic. First off, for the tanks, I know I talked about a seemingly broken tank swap mechanic in the heroic guide called Arcane Bash and Arcane Wound. Well, apparently it was supposed to be a Mythic only mechanic, which is why our tanks weren't noticing it during heroic testing. But getting back to what they are, Arcane Bash is just a big chunk of extra arcane damage on top of every shield bash that Pole does. Arcane Wound is an arcane bleed dot that will stack after every double slash attack from Phemos. With the need to pull Phemos in and out of the group, it might indicate a need to 3-tank this fight for the swaps if they are occurring at bad times. Otherwise, it sounds like tanks should swap off for the high stacks of Arcane Wound. Next up, Pole's shield charge gets a little twist. Every time he does it, 3 arcane ghostly forms of the boss also mirror the effect of shield charge, but head in 3 different directions from the one that the boss takes. If one of these arcane ghosts hits you, it's just like you got hit by the regular charge, and you get knocked up and take a heavy bleed. The trick here is to be in between the charging boss and his forms. It's telegraphed pretty well, but be careful here. It's completely avoidable raid damage, so help your healers out. Lastly, Phemos' Whirlwind becomes an arcane vortex that sucks you in. Really need any non-tanks to stay out of this vortex, otherwise they'll likely die quickly. If you find yourself close, use a speed boost to avoid it. Or even better, the raid could use a stampeding roar and keep everyone safe during it. Of course, the hope is that your strategy entails Phemos being away from the raid before this starts, so it's more a matter of not getting sucked in versus trying to get out of it. The latter isn't ideal for sure. Strategy-wise, I really don't think the overall core of the fight has changed enough to radically change strategy. The Arcane Volatility gums up some of the stacking and spreading for things, but really it's a raid awareness check for people to clear out. You will still want to find a way to dodge fire lines and stay stacked for Enfeebling Roar and spread for Pulverize. In fact, it seemed like the first Arcane Volatility came out during the first Enfeebling Roar, so it just emphasizes that you should have as much of your raid as possible sharing the roar damage and debuff, so stack on up. That's it for this guide on Twin Ogron Mythic. Tanks possibly swap off for high stacks of Arcane Wound, and keep Phemos away for good Quake weapon placement and Whirlwind. Healers watch for the usual high damage during Quakes, interrupting shouts, enfeebling roars, and pulverizes. DPS stay stacked with the rest of the raid, and be ready to move out for Arcane Volatility if you happen to get it. Thanks for watching, and as always, please comment, like, and or subscribe to the video if you found it helpful, and have a good one!